Stand in the corner, Elena." My mother didn't bother lowering her voice. She didn't have to. The boardroom went silent anyway. Leather chairs, a polished glass table, the city stacked in neat lines behind the windows. Her hand landed on my shoulder and shoved me back like I was an inconvenience she'd just noticed. I stumbled once, caught myself, and did exactly what she said. My brother Julian didn't even pause. He kept sliding documents across the table mid-business deal, already smiling like this room belonged to him. "Servitude is all you're good at," my mother said, sharp and effortless. "Don't let your bad luck haunt this family's money." I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I looked at the clock on the wall instead. 0.4 minutes. That's when the investor was supposed to arrive. They had no idea I was already standing in the room. The corner smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold water. I wrapped both hands around the condensation-slicked pitcher they'd handed me earlier, droplets soaking into my palms. From here, I had a perfect view of the people who had spent 30 years dismantling me. My father, Arthur, sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled, eyes sharp and hollow at the same time. He never saw children. He saw numbers, assets and liabilities. Julian was the asset. Flashy, high-risk, the kind of investment that looked brilliant in a pitch deck and terrifying in real life. I was the liability. The boring bond. Predictable. Reliable. The one he resented because it never made him feel powerful. Julian spoke loudly, confidently, the way men do when failure has never cost them anything. My parents leaned in, nodding, hungry for reflected glory. And I stood there, silent and invisible, watching the family machine grind toward another terrible decision. This wasn't new. When Julian failed math sophomore year, my parents hired a private tutor who came 3 nights a week. When I struggled with calculus years later, my father told me, "Figure it out. Life won't coddle you." When Julian totaled his first car driving drunk, my mother cried about his trauma, then bought him a brand new sedan for safety. When his restaurant folded 6 months after opening because he didn't believe in weekends, Arthur called it a bridge loan. Temporary, strategic, necessary. That was his favorite language. Bridge loans. Investing in potential. Temporary setbacks, and in reality, it was like pouring the family stability into a black hole shaped exactly like my brother's ambition. And Arthur couldn't stop. He was addicted to the sunk cost fallacy. Every failure made him double down. Every bailout convinced him the next one would finally pay off. And every time Julian fell, I learned exactly where I stood. Watching, waiting, never worth the risk. When my college acceptance letter arrived, Arthur didn't even open it. He waved it away. "Liquidity isn't there," he said. "We can't justify the expense." So I justified myself. I worked 3 jobs. Stocked pharmacy shelves from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. Hands numb, eyes burning. I showered at a gym and walked straight into statistics lectures smelling faintly of disinfectant and exhaustion. I learned how to live on schedules measured in minutes and sleep counted in fragments. I graduated with 0 debt and 0 help. When I told my father, he nodded once. No congratulations. No pride. Instead, he asked why I hadn't aimed for a commission-based role like Julian. "Steady income is for servants," he said. "Real men gamble." I didn't argue then either. I just kept building, quietly, methodically, until my numbers spoke louder than his opinions ever could. The irony was sharp enough to taste. The office we stood in now, glass, leather, borrowed confidence, existed because of decisions I'd made without him. He still had no idea. Julian's voice lifted with excitement as he launched into his latest scheme. A buy-in to a prestigious investment partnership. Exclusive. Elite. The price tag landed heavy in the room. $150,000. He'd already burned through his last bailout. Arthur adjusted his tie, hands shaking just slightly. Fear disguised as authority. He needed this to work. Needed Julian to finally justify decades of reckless faith. "You should be taking notes," he snapped at me without looking. "Julian is thinking big. That's the difference between you two." He gestured around the office. The view, the furniture, the illusion of power, never realizing I had paid for every inch of it. Then he said it. Certain. Practiced. "You're a sunk cost, Elena. Investing in you for 30 years was the biggest loss of my life." My fingers tightened around the pitcher handle. And as the clock bled down toward 0, I stopped feeling like his daughter and started evaluating him like a failing portfolio. They all thought I worked in administration. That was the story they told each other because it was comfortable. I scheduled meetings. I ordered catering. I carried pitchers of water. In their version of reality, that was the ceiling of my ambition. The truth was quieter and far more dangerous. I was a distressed debt investor. I made my living where companies went to die. I watched balance sheets bleed red, waited for panic to set in, then bought bad debt for pennies on the dollar. Sometimes I restructured and saved what was left. Sometimes I stripped the carcass for parts and sold it clean. Vulture to some, savior to others to heal my family. I was still just the girl who made coffee. They thought I couldn't afford a new car. They thought I rented because I didn't like responsibility. They thought my calm was passivity, not discipline. 2 weeks earlier, one of my screening algorithms lit up like a flare. Blackwood Partners. Small, aggressive, loud marketing, quiet books. They were soliciting new partners with a $150,000 buy-in, just enough to feel exclusive, just low enough to pull in people who wanted to believe they'd finally been chosen. The structure was textbook. Passion. No real assets. Money shuffled to pay earlier promises. Regulatory pressure building. Runway measured in weeks, not months, a classic Ponzi gasping for oxygen. And then I saw the name that made my stomach go cold, Julian. He'd been bragging about Blackwood for months. Said they'd headhunted him. Said they'd recognized his genius. Talked about it at dinners like it was inevitable destiny instead of a sales funnel. Blackwood hadn't recognized brilliance, they'd recognized a mark, a desperate, arrogant man with a father who owned a paid-off house and still believed in miracles. They didn't need Julian to be smart. They needed him to be confident enough not to ask questions. And Arthur was opening the door for them. When I realized what was coming, my first instinct was to warn them. I almost called my father. Almost told him to pull the plug, walk away, eat the embarrassment. Then another memory surfaced instead, my birthday dinner. The kids' table. A paper napkin instead of a chair cover. Philippa sneering at my shoes like they offended her personally. Julian laughing when someone congratulated me on a promotion, asking if it came with color copier privileges. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. Not pain exactly. Resolution. I didn't warn them. I bought the buzzsaw 48 hours ago, through a shell company Arthur had never heard of. I purchased a controlling share of Blackwood's distressed debt. Quiet transaction. Clean execution. By the time the ink dried, the truth was simple. I owned the debt. Which meant I effectively owned the firm. Which meant I controlled the board, the hiring decisions, and the timing of the audit scheduled for today. Including the man who was about to walk through the door in 3 minutes. Sterling wasn't a senior auditor, he was my head of security and compliance, and my instructions to him had been precise. Demand proof of liquid assets. Push Julian gently at first, then harder. Let him talk. Let him sweat. From my corner, I watched my brother unravel. The confidence was still there, but it had cracks now. Sweat darkened the collar of his dress shirt. His hand drifted to the leather briefcase at his feet again and again like a nervous tick. Julian didn't have $150,000. He didn't even have $5. His checking account held $400 and some change. The rest was smoke and momentum and lies stacked on top of each other. Arthur believed the money was ready. So did the other prospective partners dialing in remotely. Julian had told them all the same thing, that the funds were liquid, verified, waiting. The briefcase was his last hope. Inside it was a single piece of paper, a bank statement he'd downloaded as a PDF, opened in an editing program, and altered with shaking hands. 3 zeros added where none belonged. Printed on thick, expensive paper, he had convinced himself that weight and confidence could substitute for truth. That paper could fool a multi-million-dollar audit. I stood 5 feet away, holding a pitcher of water, waiting for him to hand it over. That was the trap. The room shifted as the door opened. A step. Polite greetings. Sterling entered with an easy smile, all professionalism and calm authority. Julian straightened instantly. relief flickering across his face like this was finally going to end well. Sterling took his seat. Asked for documentation. Julian hesitated for half a second too long. Then he reached for the briefcase. All he had to do was walk into it. He didn't look like an auditor, he looked like a verdict. Sterling filled the doorway without trying to. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a charcoal suit that cost more than Julian's car and fit like it had been built around him. The leather portfolio in his hand wasn't gripped or guarded. It hung there with the indifference of someone who ruins lives for a living and sleeps just fine afterward. 3 years ago, I'd hired him away from one of the top forensic accounting firms in the country. His reputation was simple, loyal, efficient, and terrifyingly thorough. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't bluff. He let facts do the damage as he crossed the room. He didn't glance in my direction. Not even a flicker. I was furniture, picture, air. The performance was flawless. Julian stood too fast, banged his knee on the underside of the table, laughed it off too loudly. Arthur rose with him, face split by a proud, nervous smile, pumping Sterling's hand like this was the handshake that would finally validate every bad decision he'd ever made. "We're ready to move forward," Arthur said, voice eager, brittle at the edges. Sterling took his seat, set the portfolio on the table, and opened it with deliberate calm. The room seemed to shrink around that sound. "Excitement is good," he said evenly. "Solvency is better." He outlined the funding window. Non-negotiable. Liquidity verification required before any partnership could proceed. That's when my mother snapped her fingers. The sound cracked through the air like a dry twig breaking. "Elena," she said sharply. "Water. And try not to spill it this time." She sighed theatrically, rolling her eyes. "Do we have to teach you everything?" Old Elena would have felt the heat rise to her face. The familiar burn behind the eyes. Shame dressed up as obedience. The woman holding the pitcher now felt something else entirely. I was the predator in the room, and silence was my camouflage. I poured slowly, carefully, the sound of water absurdly loud in the tension. As I leaned in, Julian angled his head toward Arthur and lowered his voice. "I fixed the numbers," he whispered. "It looks perfect." Arthur's breath caught. "You're sure?" Julian scoffed softly. "It's a PDF, Dad. They can't tell." I set the pitcher down without a sound and stepped back to my place. No one noticed. They never did. The dignity of silence is that you hear the things that scream the loudest. Julian cleared his throat and straightened, confidence stitched back together just enough to pass. He slid a cream-colored envelope across the mahogany table with a practiced smile. "Certified bank statements," he announced. "Proof of $150,000 in liquid cash." Sterling didn't touch it, he didn't even look at it. He looked at me. I stepped forward on cue, eyes downcast, shoulders slightly rounded. I let my voice tremble just enough to sell it. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Sterling. I forgot to mention, our document scanner is down. Network maintenance." Julian frowned. "So just take the paper." I shook my head apologetically. "Compliance requires a digital original for blockchain verification. We can't accept hard copies." Sterling nodded once, as if this were all perfectly reasonable. "If you forward the PDF directly from your banking app," I continued, "we can process it instantly on the main screen." I gestured to the large monitor mounted on the wall. "Bright. Unforgiving. Public." Julian froze, his hand twitched toward his laptop bag and stopped. I could almost hear the math running behind his eyes. He didn't have a banking app with $150,000 in it. What he had was a manipulated file saved locally. Logging into his real account would expose everything. Sending the fake file felt safe. Contained. Controlled. Sterling leaned back slightly, folding his hands. "Time is money," he said calmly. "If we can't verify within 10 minutes, I have another partner waiting in the lobby." Panic does something specific to people like Julian. Doesn't make them cautious. It makes them desperate to look powerful. Arthur was watching him now. Hope and fear tangled together. Julian couldn't afford to hesitate. Not in front of his father. Not in front of this man. He reached into the bag. Pulled out his laptop. Set it on the table with shaking hands. He typed furiously, eyes darting, jaw clenched. Opened his email client. Attached a file. If he hit send, my phone vibrated in my pocket. Just once. The evidence arrived clean and perfect. An email. An attachment. A forged financial document transmitted across state lines to secure capital under false pretenses. Not a lie. A felony. Federal wire fraud carries a minimum of 20 years. Julian closed his laptop and smiled, relief flooding his face like he'd just crossed the finish line. He leaned back in his chair, proud, triumphant, already imagining how this story would sound later. He never looked at me. If he had, he might have seen it. The moment he stopped being my brother and became my case file, Sterling glanced down at his tablet. One precise tap. Then another. "I've received the document," he said evenly. No smile. No approval. Just acknowledgement, as if accepting a forged federal document was part of his daily routine. He nodded once. "Liquidity is verified." However, the word hung in the air like a hook. "Standard procedure requires a 24-hour clearing period," Sterling continued. "To lock in the partnership seat today, before Asia markets open, we require immediate collateral." He reached into his portfolio and withdrew a document printed on blue legal paper. Official. Final. "A deed of trust," he said, sliding it across the table. "A short-term lien on the primary residence at 42 Oak Street." Arthur's breath caught. "This secures the $150,000 buy-in until the wire transfer clears tomorrow," Sterling went on. "The lien dissolves automatically once funds hit the account. Standard procedure for high-velocity deals." The room went silent. Arthur stared at the paper like it might move on its own. His hand twitched, then stilled. This wasn't just a signature. It was his safety net. The house was the only thing he owned free and clear. His retirement. His legacy. He swallowed. "Is this really necessary? You've seen the bank statement." Sterling met his eyes without blinking. "The board requires hard assets." He glanced at his watch. "If there's discomfort, I can offer the seat to the next candidate." Julian surged forward. "Dad, don't mess this up. It's 24 hours. The money's there." Arthur picked up the pen, then hesitated, a flicker of instinct whispering that something was wrong. Julian leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Think about Boca Raton. Condo. Golf course views. You'll be the envy of the club." Fear drained away, replaced by something far more dangerous. Greed. Arthur had spent 30 years betting on Julian. He'd sacrificed a daughter, drained savings, bent morals until they snapped. Walking away now would mean admitting his life's work was a lie. His ego couldn't survive that. "This," Arthur said finally, straightening, "is how men build empires. We take risks." He sneered in my direction one last time, then signed. Sterling stamped the page. Clack. Thud. The trap sealed. The deed of trust would be recorded. The house was now collateral. There was no way out. Julian leaned back, satisfaction spreading across his face. He turned toward me, grinning. "When I upgrade security at the new estate," he said, "maybe I'll hire you. You're good at standing quietly in corners." My mother laughed, light and sharp. "She'll need a better suit." I set the towel down carefully, picked up my phone, and walked to the head of the table. "Actually," I said calmly, "you won't be hiring anyone." I plugged my phone into the monitor. Sterling didn't move. He just waited. Arthur barked, "Sit down." The screen lit up. "Incorporation records of the debt fund," I said. Arthur squinted, reading aloud. "Elena Vance." Silence fell heavy and absolute. "I own the firm," I continued. "Sterling works for me." Julian's mouth opened. No sound came out. The screen changed. "Document B," I said. Julian's real account balance. $412.26. Julian went gray. "And document C," I finished. The forged statement appeared, annotations lighting up. Metadata. Creation time. Font mismatches. Created in Adobe Acrobat 1 hour ago, I said. It's a forgery. The truth hit them all at once. I let the silence stretch until it hurt. Then I spoke. You just committed federal wire fraud. The words landed heavy and final. Minimum sentence is 20 years. Arthur's hand spasmed. The pen slipped from his fingers and clattered against the table. Julian shook his head frantically. It was a placeholder. Everyone does it. I didn't raise my voice. You were going to steal $150,000 using Dad's house as collateral. My mother screamed. You can't do this. I looked at her, calm and precise. You already lost the house. Now you get to choose who takes it. I laid out the options. Slowly. Clearly. Option A, I call the FBI. Julian goes to prison. The house is seized. Julian's breath came shallow and fast. Option B, you sign a deed in lieu of foreclosure. The house transfers to my company. I don't press charges. Julian stays free. The room vibrated with panic. Arthur looked between us, at the son he'd built his life around and the daughter he'd written off as a loss. Something shifted behind his eyes. For the first time, he understood who held the leverage. Give me the pen, he said quietly. He signed. I nodded once. Congratulations, Mom. Bad luck is now your landlord. Then I turned to Sterling. Wait in the car. If I don't come out in 5 minutes, send everything to the district attorney. He inclined his head and left without a word. Arthur stared at the paperwork like it might undo itself. You can stay, I said. I'll cover taxes and maintenance. Hope flickered across his face. But Julian leaves, I continued. Today. Julian's composure shattered. My condo's foreclosing. I met his eyes. Not my problem. You're a liability. The words cut because they were familiar. I had become the rational investor. I cut the actual sunk cost. I kept the asset with potential. I restructured a failing business the way I'd been taught. By him, I walked out into the sunlight and didn't look back behind me. Voices rose. Accusations. Fear. A family turning on the golden child they could no longer afford. I'd started in the corner, invisible and humiliated. I ended as owner, judge, and executioner. Justice without reconciliation. Power without forgiveness. Freedom without family. In a family that measured worth in dollars, I learned to calculate mine differently. I became the auditor they never saw coming and closed the books on a toxic business. The sunk cost was the only one with a return.